Hi there, Linda Behrens here. I'm just wanting to spend a few moments sharing with you some information about the history of the development of interaction styles, and especially to answer the questions about DiSC and how interaction styles is different than DiSC and what it can do that DiSC doesn't do. Many, many years ago, I was a school psychologist in an elementary school district, and we were sent to a course on the DiSC. And because I also had my independent practice, I could pay to become certified in DiSC and have my own business using it. And I found it very interesting, but I didn't find myself in it. And so several other times I came across DiSC, and even when I was teaching a college course, I had a certified person come in and teach that to the people who were learning to use instruments in leadership development. So, but never have I found a good fit. I also came across something called social styles, and I didn't find a good fit with that either, but I kind of liked it a little bit better. I could, I could find something that I could live with if I got labeled that way. So over these experiences early on in my career, I just dismissed them. And then later, David Kersey, who was my professor and my mentor, and who had developed what he called temperament theory that we now call essential motivators, he said, well, there are two variations, two things that happen with essential motivators. There's role directing and role informing. And role directing is about being comfortable telling people what to do. And role informing is about preferring to give information so they can choose to do it or not. So that I played with for a long time and treated it as examples of ways to look at variations within the temperaments, and that it would help people find a better fit for their personality type, as I was using, looking at the full 16 patterns of personality. So I did that for a while, and then David Kersey added, well, I never really liked, this is what David said, he didn't like extroversion and introversion as a construct, but he thought that there was another distinction we could make among the temperaments, and there are those who prefer to make the first move in a relationship, and therefore he called that initiating, and those who would rather wait when they meet somebody new in a new situation and see what it's going to be like before they start talking or talking and establishing a relationship. So we created a matrix with that in our workshops as we were training other people to use the Myers-Briggs Hype Indicator as an instrument and the methodology we had developed. And so we put people into groups by putting tape on the floor, and we had this big square in the middle, and then we asked people to go stand in the area on that matrix that we made about which one was the, were you directing and informing? Were you directing and initiating? Were you responding, had a preference for responding and a preference for informing, or was it that you had a preference for initiating and informing? And so then we had 4 styles. And then having worked with the people for a little while, I understood what their patterns were like, and I could sort of see what they might have in common. Well, this became so impactful that my colleagues said, this seems to be something in and of itself. They were hungry for a handout that they could give their practitioners, or we could give to practitioners, and that those practitioners could use with their clients. So we created a little matrix handout, and I tried to find some descriptors. I went to some books by Bolton and Bolton on social styles, and I looked at each of those descriptions and said to myself, now, how would this fit all 4 of the personality patterns that would have this style, hypothetically? And in that, I found some common descriptors, and I found some things that, well, this would work if I modified it just a little bit. And out of that came a handout that we created, which is currently page 8 in the Introduction to Interaction Styles 2.0 booklet. You know, it has been tried and true and used a lot. And that worked pretty well. But then, you know, my colleagues kept saying, this feels like it's a model in and of itself. And I said, okay, if it's a model in and of itself, it has to have a core driver. It has to have something at its core, and then some basic beliefs or something behind that, and then some characteristics that we would see. And essential to this, if it really is a model in and of itself, it has to have talents. So we set about asking questions. What could we put in such a pattern as descriptors that matched all 4 of the 16 personality types or personality patterns that would share that interaction style? And then we wrote up some descriptions and tested them with people who had those types, those patterns, and got feedback and modified them. And those descriptions actually were based on, some of the descriptions were based on interviews we had conducted with the 16 personality types. So we had those to go on and written in first-person language. And so I went and I pulled stuff from those interviews that related to interaction with others. And we came up with these first-person descriptions. So we really verified this a whole lot. And so then what comes up is, well, how does this relate to DiSC? So I went to the literature on DiSC, and I had become certified as a practitioner. So, you know, I had a fair amount of training in it. And I looked at what it said, and I looked at the, for example, the high D, the driver pattern that they were describing. And I found some things that didn't, you know, they still didn't work for all 4 of the patterns that were in there. So what I found as I looked at it is that if you use the DiSC instrument and you use the interaction style self-discovery, they may not match, because people who have, for example, high D, but they have a personality pattern that would be identified as ENFJ, for example, which would, by interaction styles, have the interaction style of in charge, because they have a tendency to want to have a lot of achievement, even though they're people-oriented. So we have the high task-oriented versions, and then we have the people-oriented versions. And the people-oriented versions would score on DiSC more likely as I, not as D. So I never undertook a research study where I could compare results, because there's measurement error in all of those instruments that you can use, the Myers-Briggs, DiSC, the social styles. All of those have a margin of error. So if you try to compare them, you may or may not come with the relationships that are truly there. So what we can say about DiSC and interaction styles is that conceptually there is a relationship about the essence of what the high D driver is and the in-charge pattern. And there's a conceptual relationship between I and the get things going interaction style pattern, and a conceptual relationship between the C and the chart the course pattern with the S behind the scenes. Now I'm using the letters here because different DiSC systems and over the years the words have changed a little bit. So there is a conceptual relationship. In other words, they're getting at the same thing. Now, if you were going to have a choice, many organizations have been using DiSC and have found it quite useful, and yet maybe they could benefit from using interaction styles. And so what is the benefit of interaction styles over DiSC? Interaction styles has its foundations in that rich study of personality differences that happened among great thinkers in the 1920s. And Marston was, of course, one of those great thinkers. He didn't produce the same kind of richness that Carl Jung produced in the 1920s and that Ernst Kretschmer produced in the 1920s. So there is a richness to interaction styles in that it has been refined and sort of calibrated to identify differences in such a way that I think you find a better fit. And it does integrate fully with the 16 personality patterns that can be identified through the Jungian constructs. It also works well as a variation on the 4 temperaments or essential motivator patterns. And it stands alone as something that people can quickly relate to, very quickly identify. And it doesn't have a negative connotation to the names. In charge, chart the course, behind the scenes, get things going. Those are actions or positions you tend to take in relationship to others. And it doesn't seem to focus, interaction styles doesn't seem to focus on the negative side. Now, of course, no matter what model you're using, there is a downside to overusing the pattern. So the goal in the end is to develop the agility to be able to move and shift, and to also know what is your home base, what is your energy. There's also some research in the medical literature that supports stress responses related to interaction styles. This needs more research and more detailing, but conceptually there's a match there with fight, flight, flurry, and freeze. And those are stress responses that our bodies do. And so interaction styles really addresses movement patterns, energy, typical energy, and some very observable things that come into play when we're interacting with others. And one of the main purposes of using a personality model is to help people identify the differences in themselves and others, and to appreciate those differences and make space for different energies. And so interaction styles is a model or a lens that has a rich history of doing that now, since we articulated this way back in the 1990s. And it's stood the test of time in terms of working. So I hope you can see that there are some advantages to using interaction style over using DiSC. And for me, as a trainer of practitioners, I really think that the benefits of interaction styles outweigh the DiSC as a tool. That being said, DiSC can work to do the magic that any good personality tool will do. And that is help people appreciate differences and recognize some of those differences and learn to shift their behaviors. So it doesn't mean that it wasn't good to use it, in my view. It really is helpful to have a model that gets at information in as quick a way as DiSC does, and in a way that helps people find a better fit, that helps people identify core drivers of their personality and their talents, and that does it in a way that is positive, that keeps the focus on the positive, and that is very easily accessible. So I hope that helps you understand the differences between social style and between DiSC and interaction styles. Social styles seems to work pretty well. To talk about social styles, the difference between interaction styles and social styles is not quite the same gap as there is between interaction styles and DiSC, but the social styles have they still have some problem for me in helping people find a good fit, because they didn't take into account the full type of the other lenses of seeing people. And so when you have this multi-lens approach, you have better ways of seeing all of these differences and of evaluating other tools. And so, like with DiSC, with social styles, I think it can do good work. It can help people identify ways to shift their behavior, as long as they find the right fit. And that's big for me, to get really what's at your core self, as well as your developed self and your contextual self. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit about how interaction styles was developed, and about the differences between a couple of models that are out there that seem very, very similar. And if you are working with those models professionally, then all you need to do is just say that there are some similarities there, and there are some big differences, and they're getting at very similar kinds of information. And of course, we think our models are better. So thank you.